All right, just a quick one before we get going. So please don't take anything you hear in today's episode as financial advice. Please speak to a trained professional if you do wish to participate in markets. Crypto is inherently risky and you will lose all your money, particularly if you listen to us for financial direction. So enough of that. Please give us a like, subscribe, enjoy the show, and see you next time.
And we're back. Good afternoon, good morning, good local
Hello,
time.
hello. Good
Hey,
evening for me,
Dimitar.
yes.
We've
Hey,
chatted
Jedi.
a ton on Spaces and a lot of communication over Twitter. It's great to finally meet you in person, and it's great to have you with us in the studio. And it's been a long time coming. IPOR, welcome, sir. Introduction briefly in terms of who you are, what you do, and IPOR. Give us a brief intro.
Sure, sure. So first, I'll start. I'm Dimitar, one of the co-founders of IPOR. I think that actually Darren is my co-founder and CEO of IPOR is much more coming to such events, to speak. But I basically am kind of like the DeFi guy, the native DeFi guy in IPOR. I started in crypto very early, 2016. I started building products for actually traditional institutions, building crypto products. And then I moved to building centralized exchanges. At that point in time, I also got very fascinated because this is when Uniswap launched. I got very fascinated about bonding curves in general and DeFi. And yeah, I have been in the space for quite many years. For 3 years, was working as in a VC here in Asia. So was also being very blessed to be able to speak with a lot of the founders of basically the relevant DeFi projects, which are right now, back in the day when they were still in the idea phase, and see them grow. And since December 2020, actually started building IPOR with Darren. About IPOR and what it does, it's really building a new DeFi primitive in the space, which is bringing interest rate swaps, traditional vanilla interest rate swaps on chain. And I mean, we can go into the conversation of why that.
Yeah, I mean, we have had Darren on before. I was very fortunate to have him on quite a while ago. It's been about 8 months ago, and obviously the whole idea behind IPOR and fixed interest rates and the importance of having fixed interest rates. I mean, we know that traditional finance essentially from borrowing and lending runs on those fixed interest rates, and we don't have that kind of that almost stipulation, that line in the sand that defines DeFi lending rates and borrowing rates, and it seems so obvious that someone should come along and provide us with essentially the guideline. And the way that I imagine it is like rail tracks. They're the rail tracks. You can't veer off. They're the interest rates. I wanted to just kind of interrogate why people kind of don't hold value as much as we think they should within the DeFi context of fixed interest rates. Or do you think that's changing
now? Yeah, I'm not really sure whether that's changing. So initially, why we actually started building IPOR was because during 2020, I was participating very heavily as I was a DeFi power farmer back then, because all of my attention and time was just dedicated to finding different strategies and just executing them. And a lot of that had to do with I was basically borrowing money from the credit markets in order to deploy them into various protocols to farm for some time, dump their tokens, and then move on to another strategy. But then, as more money started coming into the space, obviously it was becoming a little bit more difficult to get like those very, very high returns. But also another thing started to come out is like many times, especially when I was like leveraging positions on Alpha Homora, for example, and my interest rate on my borrow would literally make my strategy run unprofitable. And for me, this was something that, this was a pain point for me. And then just looking at what the space was back then, looking at Aave and Compound and, their variable rate credit markets, and just trying to judge the feasibility of them creating a fixed rate market, I came to the conclusion back then that it really does not fit their like overall ecosystem to have like a fixed rate credit market. And back then, there was Notional, there were a couple of participants that were trying to build fixed rate credit markets, but they were very small, yes, and very little liquidity. And I think that one of the main issues with why people are not more interested about fixed rates is simply because protocols like Aave and Compound are so long-standing that majority of the participants just feel much safer to hold a lot of money on Aave, Compound, or now Morpho, before that Euler, but fixed rate products, fixed rate credit markets are a little bit more complicated to understand. And also they have not had that experience of having billions of dollars inside, and they have not been a subject of that scrutiny in terms of like hackers to see whether they're actually going to be able to survive if they have a couple of billions of dollars inside.
So it obviously makes sense on a very logical level, right? Yet we have this kind of disparity with, like you say, your incumbents, your Aaves. They've set almost the precedent. Do you think that there's an opportunity perhaps for some kind of a partnership or a recognition in terms of what it is that you guys are doing and how you're going about doing it for those protocols to essentially use those interest rates as the guideline? Or do you think it suits them to continue with kind of like the current narrative that they have going?
Yeah, for example, in the case of Aave, let's say Aave Compound, I don't think that it's going to be in their interest to try to manipulate their interest rate curve to fit some benchmark. Yes, because they're actually protecting their user base and their TVL by having what they currently have. So I don't think that they're going to move to a different construct, and it's going to be up to other credit markets, that are coming, that are competing now with them, of like how are they actually going to make the experience for lenders and borrowers better. And we already had like a sneak peek of something like this when Morpho, for example, launched the optimizers, and you see that they scaled up to $1 billion within just like 1 or 2 months, and up to a point where a significant amount of the money that was going through Aave was actually being taken out and being P2P matched by the optimizers. I don't know if you saw that proposal of Mark Zeller on the forums for like, oh, we want to give incentives to protocols that are aligned with us and protocols that are not aligned with us, and in the not aligned with us was basically just the Morpho optimizer protocol. It was quite interesting.
Well, obviously you're going to have a scenario where, if you have a business, you're going to look out for your own interests within that business. But I would have thought that for the long term, if there was kind of like a stable interest rate that people knew about, that effectively you're creating a positive feedback loop, I would assume anyways, where people would then readily use the protocol a lot more, as opposed to I go into Aave, I stake my ETH, I borrow USDC at one day and it's at 8.2%, and I come back 3 days later because it's not something that I'm watching every day or every hour, and it's now sitting on 22%. I would imagine by having a fixed interest rate, you would create a positive feedback loop where people knew what they were getting themselves into, and you would effectively promote by default people to use your protocol a lot more, as opposed to a situation where I recently experienced where I go and stake my ETH, I borrow USDC, and I borrowed it at like 8.2%, and then 3 days later I go back to the website to pay what I had borrowed, and I realized that it's actually sitting on a 22% interest rate. Like, that's just insane. You know what I mean? And it's like, sure, it's not a constant, but at the same time, it all adds up. And I'm not really that keen to go and do the whole thing again, because I don't know what I'm getting myself into. And I understand that that's kind of something that people accept. But surely if we have fixed interest rate over a period of time, I know what I'm getting myself into. They'll end up getting more users. Or is it just a case of, well, our variable interest rate lands us earning us more money irrespective of how many people use it, and we'll just carry on using it regardless?
I think it's one of both, a little bit of both. I think that their variable interest rate, it's actually just generating more money than if they would run a fixed rate market. But I also think that, it is a complex thing to build, and to maintain, a variable credit market, but also maintain a fixed rate protocol. It might be a little bit too much. It's a different architecture, completely different architecture between those two things. So just to maintain the code base, it's like, yeah, it's not that easy.
Okay, well, coming to that point where, obviously you guys had opportunity during this bear market to sit down and build this thing, which you guys did very successfully, and I think you guys built something that was not only functional and practical, but also easy to use. And it was like, from a user experience, I think you guys really did get the UI UX right. And in that process, you guys also landed up learning where your limitations were in terms of what the product market fit was. And I just want to just quickly interrogate that. Like, what were the lessons that essentially you guys learned from the initial product? Because, we obviously have a version 2 now, which you guys put a lot of work into, and we'll get into that after this. But I'm just curious in terms of like what you guys originally intended, and then the lessons that you learned along the way, without it being too much of a long answer, because I'm sure there's a lot to talk about there. But I think just, the broad strokes perspectives that you guys kind of went through.
Yeah, so some lessons that we learned. Yes, it's like, for example, it's very easy to print unlimited amount of the index on chain when the GUI is like 3 or 4. It becomes prohibitively expensive when it's 30. So, we developed an entire algorithm around this of like when the interest rate should actually be published. So it's not published every single time when the rate moves, but it needs to be a specific amount of time that have passed, or a specific magnitude of move. So creating this at the same time, forcing publishing when people are taking swaps. So a lot of stuff around gas optimization. Another thing that we basically learned is the power of economic attacks. Yes. So when at the beginning, when we were deciding, okay, what amount of risk this pool is willing to underwrite, which is based on what do we expect that the market might move if somebody decides to attack the credit markets. Yeah? So we had those ideas of like, okay, how much money can somebody move, and how consistent somebody can manipulate the credit market rates. So we did have the thinking that this number is like around from the majority of the participants, we saw like 150 million maximum, until we got to a point where, we experienced our first economic attack, which was just 1 month after we launched. So last year,
I remember that.
Beginning of last year, where the attacker basically used something like $400 million on chain just to manipulate the array. So being like much more vigilant, creating like a risk oracle that at all point in time is following all of the liquidity across all of the credit markets, calculates the distance to the king, calculates how much money is needed to move the rate with X, and then limiting the amount of swaps that we are offering to a point where it is not economically viable for an attacker to basically take a swap and manipulate the credit market rate. So just to say, it's always going to cost him more money to manipulate the rate than the amount, the notional amount of swaps that the protocol is going to offer. So this is something that was also developed, and then just a lot of the stuff that we do in general is pricing those interest rate swaps. So I think that this have been spoken before, but where there is a set formula, for example, we use the Black-Scholes formula to calculate options premium. And this is something that is being used by almost all of the protocols in the option space. There is nothing like this for interest rate swaps. So everything is being built, basically taking a lot of complex quant models from off-chain and trying to apply them on-chain. Yeah, so using different equations basically just to make it viable for this to be calculated on-chain. And of course, there are a lot of compromises that you have to do there between efficiency and how wrong you are going to be with the pricing. So we have had a lot of progress on this one. Yes, we built the entire ITF, which is our internal quant library that is being prepared basically to be given to the DAO, to the community, to actually manage those parameters for pricing. So instead of having one formula that calculates and prices all the swaps, you can change the formula continuously by changing the parameterization inside. And this can be a process that is basically governed by the different work groups inside the DAO.
Wow. Okay. So there's obviously a lot to unpack there. The question that comes to mind, like when you were just saying all these things that you guys do and kind of like the analysis and the insight that you need, the question that came to mind for me was, how does IPOR actually make its money? How do you guys generate income for the protocol itself?
So there are multiple streams of revenue. The first one comes from basically one of the advantages that we have, that because of the RFQ system that we were speaking about right now, pricing everything using quant models, bringing that on chain, the assets actually do not need to stay idle inside the pool on Ethereum, but can be used on the different credit markets. So IPOR is basically supplying money to all of the credit markets that are inside the index. So that's the Aave and Compound for now, but then there are proposals for inclusion of other credit markets. The second one is from creating that win-win scenario. Yeah, so let's say that we already established that there is not that much demand for now for fixed, because majority of people still trust Aave and Compound for their borrowing needs. Yes, and this is shown by the TVA of those protocols compared to the others. So if you are a borrower and you go to Aave, let's say you can take a 8% variable rate or a 15% stable rate. Yes, there is quite a big gap between whatever is being offered variable and whatever is the stable rate. Or you can come to IPOR, and let's say the index right now is 8, you can take pay fixed receive floating at 9 or 10%. Yes, so it's a win-win scenario where the borrower himself, the hedger, yes, is ensuring a fixed rate for his borrow, which is much lower than what he can obtain on the credit markets that he trusts. And at the same time, the liquidity providers, their money is already earning the yield from those credit markets. They're underwriting that risk at a premium, saying that, okay, if something happens and your cost of borrowing is actually much higher, we are going to pay that difference. But the majority of time, it's not really a trader versus pool. The trader wins some that he gets now that security, and the pool wins because the pool is charging basically a premium on top of the rate, kind of like an option premium, if you think about it. And this is the main sources of revenue. So the fees that the traders are paying when opening and closing swaps, the settlement of their swaps, and also the money that is being deposited to different credit markets to earn that native yield.
Okay, great. Really interesting, and it's almost like there's a whole suite of products there. It's not just, well, we'll tell you what the interest rate is. I mean, at the end of the day, you guys, I know you have liquidity pools. I know that you sat down kind of like last year, coming into the latter part of 2023, and you were like, well, we need to actually make some changes. And I'm just curious as to what led you guys to do a version 2. I mean, version 2s were quite popular in this bear market, and it was pretty cool to actually see, kind of like people wanting to take their protocols to the next level. You guys did the same thing. So what was the reasoning behind it? And, where are you guys now? And what did you guys bring effectively into effect?
Yes, so version 1 really was aimed at only two things. Yes, having like a basic asset manager and having an interest rate swap basically running. So think about this like an MVP of a product. So the architecture that we used for version 1 was the architecture that we needed in order to get that product to market as fast as possible and see how this is going to be perceived. Yes, once we launched, in the first couple of months. So first, our liquidity went from like 2 million to 45 million in the first month, and second, it was the amount of interest rate swaps that we were underwriting. So I think up to now it has been total of 4.3 billion of notional of interest rate swaps underwritten during those 1.5 years. But I mean, excluding things that what to do with the Oracle, building the risk Oracle as well, changing a lot of parameters. Version 2 is just a lot of the learnings of how can we be more nimble. We noticed at least 4 DPEGs last year of major stablecoins. So I think that both USDC and USDT DPEGed one very big time and one time which was, it was not as critical, but still it was quite a big DPEG. And at that point in time, we had a lot of traders that were actually coming to IPOR, and because they were playing those big stable coins, DPEGs, they were also opening swaps for hundreds of millions of dollars. So obviously it was a stressful time, but we also learned, we need to be able to do changes very, very fast. Yes, we need to be very nimble. And also everything in the credit markets, at some point, there were problems with Aave. At some point, there were problems with Compound. There was no liquidity that could be withdrawn from those markets. So our liquidity providers can actually not withdraw their funds from our protocol. So taking into account all of those things, we built V2. And additionally, V2 is much more about composability with other protocols. So how can you build a bigger suite of products? Not only connecting with Aave and Compound for just depositing your idle assets there, but actually introduce things like, okay, we want to do leverage looping, or we want to deposit to one market and borrow, but then we want to change to a different market if the rate environment changes, and borrow from that other market because it's cheaper. So all of that underlying architecture, the diamond proxy router of IPOR, the system that basically pulls the parameters for different actions, kind of like an intent based transaction where the user kind of sends the parameters of the transaction with the transaction itself, which is being signed by our Oracle on the back end. Basically allows us to be much more scalable and be much more innovative with new products that we are developing.
So our intents actually kind of like veering off to the right here, but I mean, our intents actually a part of what it is that you guys are offering? What is the definition of intent in the context of what IPORs do?
So I like to say that we probably are one of the first protocols that implemented an intent-based transaction. But in broad terms, a lot of people, when they think intents, they're only thinking about oh, I want to swap asset A for X amount
Yes,
of asset B.
That's the way I
Yes.
think about it.
Yeah, but when it comes about yield, yes, you basically say I want to earn X amount of yield. So I think it has been discussed before. We have a very innovative tokenomics, for example, called Power IPOR. Yes, and this allows you to get like a multiplier on the yield that you are earning, depending on the ratio between the assets that you have provided and the amount of Power IPOR that you have delegated towards that specific pool. So we kind of created like the original intent, which was choose my APR. So a user comes and he says, okay, I have $10,000 and I want to earn 40% APR. Well, that's the intent. That's what the user wants. Yes. And from this point, the router in collaboration with Enso, actually, that are providing, the entire infrastructure for that intent-based transaction, it does multiple things. Yeah. So it takes the asset, it looks to what amount of IPOR it needs to swap the USDC in order to be in the correct ratio. Yes. So it takes the assets, it does the swapping, then it stakes your liquidity, like your stable coin. Then it takes the IPOR, it stakes it for Power IPOR, and then delegates it to the pool. So as a user, like your end result is basically, okay, I now have a position, I'm an LP inside that pool, and I'm earning 40% APR. So this is the original intent. Yes. How intents are going to evolve in the yield space? It's going to be more of a kind of like a limit order, like a limit order book where different parties come and they basically say, okay, I'm willing to, let's say, pay 5 or 7% fixed rate to be receiving the floating leg on USDC, and this can be matched with somebody else that fits, that comes and wants to trade against that position. So how you get all of those positions, where you run them, how you execute them, where they match. This is something that for now it's still a work in progress. Yes, because we all know that there are a lot of limitations to just running order books on Ethereum. Yes, so this is something that Intents in a way is trying to solve. Literally creating those order books on chain that anybody can take two positions that are matching and match them together, execute those transactions. But there is still some work to get there. To get there in terms not only to be able to do it, but to have that as a very good UX for the people that are doing it. Yes, for the participants.
I know that you guys have spent a huge amount of time on that user experience. I mean, I know that, having spoken to Darren before and the philosophy that you guys have carried into, the protocol itself, it's like, it really is a pleasure to use the protocol. It's like you don't arrive there scratching your head. It's all very straightforward, and you know what you're getting yourself into. Products, in terms of the products that you guys are currently offering and the evolution of where we are currently, I think one of the big narratives that are coming for this bull market are obviously liquid stake derivatives and then restaking tokens and all those permutations thereof, is that you guys obviously have known about this. You recognize that this is a product that people want. You've earned the trust, from, like you say, you had your baptism by fire in the first month. You guys got exploited. I think you guys dealt with that whole scenario impeccably. And I think from that, even though there was this bad situation that happened, I do believe that that's where you guys landed up earning probably the most stripes, in terms of people looking at you and saying, okay, these guys are serious about what it is that they're doing. We can trust them. Now we're entering into essentially another kind of like paradigm that is, LSTs and the rest of it. And I'm just curious as to, firstly, what are the products that you guys offering at the moment, and then speak to us about, you know, the liquid staking stuff and obviously Eigenlayer and the importance of, you know, this huge narrative that's coming.
The last product that we launched was the liquid staking derivative for Lido. So it is the STE interest rate swap based on the Lido index, and we launched this I believe 3 months ago, around 3.5 months ago. We launched this. In the first 2 weeks, it grew to almost 100 million worth of notional. So you could see that the market demand for such a product was there and was very strong. And our only limitation at that point was the amount of assets that is in the pools. So you have that situation where you have like a growing demand for a product, but at the same time the supply side is not there yet. And I think, you know, liquid risk-taking tokens at that point started, you know, Eigenlayer and everything started to become like very, very FOMO. So a lot of people went to speculate on airdrops. But to go back to the Lido STE trade and what we needed to build in order to be able to facilitate trading of such an instrument was that we actually needed to create an entire real-time Lido index. So, you know, Lido only publishes the index once every 24 hours, and in between that period is kind of like black hole. So what we did was we created an entire infrastructure where we monitor like 500,000 Lido validators every single block. You know, the amount of fees that they're receiving, slashing if slashing occurs, the amount of MEV that they are getting. So all of this is to basically calculate with a very big precision of what the Lido rate is going to be tomorrow. And actually, if you go to IPOR, if you go to our app, IPOR.io, you can see how the Lido real-time rate changes during the day, and where exactly is the time when Lido is making those publications. So this is the thing that, for example, for us as an interest rate swap protocol, it's super important to have in order to price those derivatives correctly and always offer you know, a good price for those interest rate swaps. But this is definitely going to be very applicable once, you know, the liquid risk-taking tokens and Eigenlayer come out of the, you know, it's just an airdrop farming for now. But once this becomes an actual product and it starts, you know, it starts having economic activity with AVSs and it has different yields and so on, and different slashing conditions. So this is exactly the same infrastructure that you will need then to monitor what is happening in real time with those protocols. And I think that we are the only one in the space that is really paying attention to that. And additionally, I think ION protocol. I think ION protocol is the name. It's a credit market that is also building a credit market, which is, you know, not based on what is the Oracle price of a liquid risk-taking token or STE, but more like, okay, for what amount of ETH can this asset be redeemed? So instead of counting on Uniswap and Curve, you actually read on chain and you measure. You see what is the rate, if there have been slashing conditions and so on. So I think that this is going to play a very, very important part, because obviously with Eigenlayer, with having an asset like Ethereum also being able to generate such yield, you know, now everybody are FOMOing about the Bitcoin ETF, but I think that an Ethereum ETF with an asset that is actually earning yield as well, not only for the exposure towards the asset, is going to be something that is going to have even greater demand.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's almost like we've had an interesting mindset, you know, building up into, you know, this halvening, and we know that in the past we've always had kind of like an acceleration towards ETH before the halvening, and hasn't happened this time around, which is quite unique in terms of, you know, this time it is different from that perspective. And I'm curious, just from a a market perspective and someone who's been in the space for a long time. I mean, how do you like see this difference playing into, going into the essentially the second phase of this bull run? Do you see an acceleration towards ETH? Do you see it more become centered around Bitcoin, or is it going to land up shifting to the ETH ETF?
I think that the biggest difference that I personally see is in terms of how do you compare different assets. So it's very difficult to draw comparison between Bitcoin and Ethereum, simply because nothing can compare with Bitcoin. Yes, it is the most liquid. It has the biggest lend. It's been there for 10, 11 years, running 99.5% of the time. So I think that Bitcoin is basically in a class of its own. But then in previous cycles, we were always having that concept of, there is Ethereum, and then there are those other chains which are kind of like, if Ethereum goes up, they can actually go up even more than Ethereum. Is like a beta on Ethereum. And somehow people were drawing comparison between ETH and those other chains. And I think that now having like in the background, having that ETH ETF, I personally do not think that there is a higher beta, because I think that the Ethereum ETF is going to suck all of the liquidity from everywhere. Yes, so it's not the current market participants that are going to dictate the prices of those assets. It's a lot of extra money which is coming into the space.
Just to be a fly on the wall and see how that ETF, the Ethereum ETF, plays out, I think is going to be an absolutely incredible thing to witness. And I think it is very different from that perspective. So different that I don't think we could script it any way we tried.
No, because before, in previous cycles, kind of like the market participants were kind of like the same people. So there was that concept of like, oh, I'm going to rotate in another asset because,
Yes.
it's a bet on Ethereum. So this other asset is going to pump now, and people draw comparison between the valuations of those two assets. But if price is the leading indicator, yes, in crypto, and you have tens of billions of dollars that are being pushed into Ethereum and Ethereum ETF, then obviously the price of Ethereum is going to be flying. Now, tell me which of the other market participants that currently has assets in like competing chains or something is going to be like, nah, it's okay, I'm going to continue bit on my own chain, because at some point I hope that those people are going to realize that my chain is undervalued. But is it really? Do you first think that your chain or your peak is like that competitive to Ethereum in the first place? And then again, if market price is the deciding factor, that traditional money that is flowing in is a lot, and it's not going to stop coming. Yeah. So you have an asset that's just going to be increasing all the time, while you're going to be sitting there and like, no, I'm going to be playing my higher beta play there. So this is something that I think it's different. Maybe I'm going to be proven wrong, and those asset managers will be like, oh, we also want to have like beta on Ethereum or something like this. But with everything that's happening in the Ethereum ecosystem, the EVM ecosystem in general, because it's not only Ethereum, yes, it's Ethereum and all the constellations of surrounding chains that are connected to Ethereum. I think it's going to be very difficult to get like that beta this time around.
What are your thoughts around kind of like EVM meets Bitcoin? And we've seen quite a big push in that direction. I think we've actually done a couple of articles on a few of them. And I'm just curious as to whether you see a world where we can kind of like have a marriage between the two, where you have the security of Bitcoin and the fundamentals of Bitcoin combined with the smart contracts that obviously the EVM and the Ethereum layer bring. Thoughts around that?
I probably am not the best person to answer something like this. I mean, obviously everybody have their opinions, but I'm in no way an expert of Ethereum, Bitcoin-based smart contracts.
Yeah.
It's not something that I really have spent a lot of time on researching. But I would just say that Bitcoin is beautiful because it's simple.
Yeah.
And I personally do not think that it needs to have more than that. Yes, it can remain simple and does the thing that it does best, just continue running and not having any issues and being very, very conservative and being very trusted. Of course, if there are teams or protocols that somehow want to connect, like the inscriptions and stuff, and to do things around Bitcoin, I think that the Bitcoin miners are just going to be very happy. It's another source of revenue for them. But I'm personally in the camp of like it does its job. It's simple and elegant, and yeah. Let it just do this job, and for all of us to trust it and to have the biggest amount of liquidity and to be able to onboard hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars inside.
Great answer. And I wanted to ask you, because you don't pretend to be the expert, and it's very important for us to get opinions that involve all thinking. I mean, you're a founder in a protocol, and you have perspective around what it is that you're doing. So a great answer. I think it's as good as someone who would be classed as being an expert in the field. But I love the fact that you said Bitcoin is beautiful in its simplicity, and I completely agree with you. I do see the possibility of the combination between the two, but obviously that needs to be put to the test. And at the end of the day, as you know better than anyone, product market fit is everything. And ordinals and the rest of it have come out the blue, really, and look at what they're doing. I mean, a Bitcoin NFT sold for 40 Bitcoin this morning, and it's kind of like, okay, well, where did that come from? So yeah. So, and the thing is that it's a simple thing, it's a simple thing. It's there forever. It's on the blockchain, and it's pretty cool how that's kind of like manifested itself in terms of IPOR and looking to the future and the goals that you guys have set out. What does the future look like for IPOR from your perspective? Like, what is that wish list when you think about IPOR a year, 2 years down the line? I know that 2 years is a long time, but I mean, what do you think? Where would you like to see IPOR, and what does it look like for you?
So for me, the mission is always the same, like scale DeFi, allow for more participants to use DeFi, allow for more money to be able to onboard into DeFi. And this is what drives us, yes. And interest rate swaps, creating a fixed rate products, creating structured products that are basically a one-click experience. Yes, I want to earn yield. I click that button and I start earning yield. This for me is like what is needed. We have seen in the past couple of months a lot of different credit markets that come out. So we have Fluid that come out. Obviously, Morpho-Blue, Euler Finance is coming out right now, or in the next couple of months. Fluid just came out a couple of weeks ago. Yes, and this is added to everything else that have already been built. The Aves, the Compounds, the Spark, and other credit markets. We also have some fixed rate credit markets like Notional. We have coupon-based markets like Pendle and so on. And for me, this is the opportunity. Yes, everybody built in a silo with their own parameters and their own pools and liquidation penalties and LTVs and so on. But the user actually does not care about any of those things. Yes, and you cannot expect that the user of DeFi is going to go and understand like all of those credit markets. User just wants leverage, and he wants cheap leverage. And this is where IPOR as a liquidity hub basically abstracts all of that complexity. Yes, it just collects all the data from everywhere, continuously run its algorithms to, when should the user deposit here and when should his position be deposited somewhere there because it's going to be more profitable or it's going to be cheaper to borrow. When a leverage loop should be migrated from this market to another market, just really making it a one stop for everybody that are doing anything related to credit in DeFi, and and just arbitraging those inefficiencies, because you also cannot expect that single users are going to be like arbing the rate between, let's say, Aave and Morpho votes. Yes, there can be discrepancies there, but it's either expensive for a user to try to arbitrage those differences, or because those are variable markets. Okay, I want to arbit, and then in the next 30 minutes the rate inverts on the two markets. Yeah, so this makes it very inefficient to be arbed by individuals, but it makes it very good place for a protocol, because especially in our case, with all the monitoring that we are doing, we know at every single point, at every single block, every single credit market, how much liquidity there is, what is the utilization rate, what is the rate behavior, what's the interest rate curve of that market. If 5 million are deposited into that market, how it is going to change the rate, what has been the rate in the past 1, 2, 3, 6 months, 12 months, what has been the average utilization rate. So all of these data, not just thinking about credit markets as like a snapshot of, the rate here is 6 and the rate here is 4. Because from a user perspective, it's not important what the rate is this specific block. Yes, the user cares what's going to be his cost of borrowing for a month or for 3 months, and this is why we are building IPOR. For better or worse, people start learning things after something have really gone out of proportion. Yeah. So for example, this is the situation with rates right now when it comes to like the airdrop, the points, the points, the shards, and everything else, like where people are paying a lot of money in order to get access to those points. Yes, it was the same that what happened with UniV2. Yes, it was running for how long before people actually start asking the question of like, actually there is impermanent loss here. Yes, when Uniswap was small, nobody was talking about impermanent loss, or very few people were talking about impermanent loss. But when it scales to hundreds of millions and billions of assets inside, suddenly you have people started to wonder, does it make sense for me to provide liquidity in that pool? Do I actually make money from this? Yeah. So every single time when we have like a rampart speculation, there are some learnings, and it's also when the general population starts care about a specific subject. And I think that this time, with eigenlayer and points and all of those things, it's really going to educate the crowd. Yes, and everything is, for me, 2024 is the year that people are going to speak about yields.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also what's really interesting about it is, and it's such an obvious thing to say, but it's how it's the evolution of the space is just accelerated. In the last 2 years, I think we've seen more come out of the woodwork and more kind of like acceleration than we have probably in the previous like 4 or 5 years. And it's like, and I think now with what's happening with these ETFs and now the Ethereum ETF, I think we're in for even more of an acceleration. I mean, we're seeing Bitcoins on the threshold of doing an all-time high, and we still have another month and a half before we see a halvening. Then it's going to be the lead up to the Ethereum ETF. Do you think they're going to accept that? Do you think it's going to go through, or do you think it's going to be like another 2 years of backwards and forwards? What do you think that is going to happen there from the ETF perspective?
I'm 90% sure that it's going to be accepted. I'm just not sure whether there is going to be a staking involved inside. I think that Ethereum ETF is it's very low probability that we are not going to see that. I think that it's very low probability that we're going to see an ETF of another asset outside of Ethereum for the next 2 or 3 years, but Ethereum is a given for me this year. The question here really is there going to be any form of staking inside that ETF? Are the providers of the ETF also going to be able to take positions? And considering that Coinbase is the the custodian of 10 of the applications, I find it hard to believe that there is not going to be some element of staking inside.
Yeah. Cool. Let's see what happens. I think we're in for a hell of a year. It's definitely kicked off on the right turn. And yeah, thanks for your time, sir. Appreciate it. And I'm sure we'll chat again. And until then, take it easy and all the best. Thanks for joining us.
Cheers. Cheers. Thank you.
All right, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please give us a like, subscribe, and turn the notification bell on for next time. See ya.